Have you ever met someone who didn't need to speak a single word, yet managed to change the course of your life forever? Someone who, without lectures, without instructions, without even asking anything of you, showed you what it means to live with purpose, with patience, and with love. This is the story of one such teacher. A teacher who never stood in front of a classroom. A teacher who never handed out assignments. A teacher who, in fact, never spoke at all. And yet, for those who were willing to see, his presence alone was more powerful than any textbook, any lesson, or any carefully written speech. It began in a small town in North Carolina, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where summer afternoons stretched lazily beneath the sound of cicadas, and children chased each other barefoot down cracked sidewalks. For 12-year-old Emily Carter, life was simple, yet strangely heavy. She had a heart full of questions, and a mind restless with doubt. Her father worked long hours at a factory just outside of town, and her mother, though loving, often seemed too tired to notice the weight her daughter carried inside. Emily was not a loud child. She wasn't the type to be the center of attention, and she didn't crave the spotlight. Instead, she carried her silence like a shield. But silence, when mixed with loneliness, can sometimes grow heavy enough to break you. She often felt invisible at school. Teachers praised louder voices, brighter smiles, and quicker answers. Emily's quiet nature was often mistaken for weakness. Her classmates rarely noticed her, except when they wanted someone to laugh at, someone who didn't fight back. It was during one of those long, restless summers that Emily first noticed the man everyone in town called Mr. James. He lived just a few houses down, in a modest, weathered home with peeling white paint and a porch swing that swayed gently in the wind. He was older, his hair silver gray, his back slightly bent from the years. He was always outside, sitting in the shade of his porch, quietly whittling wood into shapes that seemed to appear as if by magic. Birds, flowers, sometimes small boats that looked as if they could really float. What set him apart wasn't just his calm presence. It was the fact that he never spoke. Not to the neighbors, not to the mailman, not even to the children who would stop and stare at his carvings. He simply smiled, nodded, and went back to his quiet work. Some said he had lost his voice years ago, though nobody seemed to know exactly how. Others believed he had taken some kind of vow of silence, though that seemed unlikely for a man living in such a small, ordinary town. Emily was curious, but more than that, she was drawn to him. Something about his silence made her feel less alone in her own. One afternoon, as she walked past his porch, she stopped. She didn't know what to say, but she didn't have to. He looked up, smiled softly, and then held out a small wooden bird he had carved. Hesitant, Emily stepped closer and took it. It was smooth beneath her fingertips, its wings outstretched as if ready to take flight. She whispered a thank you, though she wasn't sure if he even heard. He simply nodded and went back to carving. That was the beginning. Day after day, Emily found herself passing by his house, slowing her steps, waiting for that small exchange. Sometimes he handed her a carved figure. Sometimes he simply nodded. Other times, he didn't even look up, but somehow, even that was comforting. Slowly, she began to linger. She would sit on the porch steps, watching his hands move with patience and precision, shaving away rough edges until beauty revealed itself beneath the wood. Weeks passed, and though no words were ever exchanged, Emily began to feel something shift inside her. Watching him work, she realized that silence wasn't always emptiness. Sometimes silence was full of intention, full of peace, full of lessons that words could never quite carry. One afternoon, curiosity got the better of her. She brought along a block of wood she had found in her father's shed and placed it in front of him. His eyes lit up with quiet amusement, and he handed her his spare knife. Tentatively, she began to carve. The knife slipped at first, rough against her small hands, but he didn't correct her. He simply let her try, only occasionally gesturing with a tilt of his head or a gentle tap of the wood to guide her. It was the first time Emily had ever felt the freedom to learn without fear of mistakes. There were no grades, No corrections, no harsh words. Only the slow rhythm of trying, failing, and trying again. By the end of the summer, Emily had carved her own little bird. It wasn't perfect, its wings were uneven, its head too large, but it was hers. And when she held it up, proud and smiling for the first time in a long while, Mr. James looked at her with such warmth in his eyes that she felt seen, truly seen. The seasons changed, and Emily carried that bird everywhere she went. She tucked it in her backpack when school began again, and whenever the world felt too loud, too cruel, she would slip her hand inside, curl her fingers around the tiny figure, and remember the silent teacher who had shown her the power of patience. But life, as it often does, grew more complicated. By the time Emily reached high school, the quiet confidence she had once felt began to slip. The world around her became harsher. Her classmates grew more cutting in their words, teachers expected louder voices, and even at home, silence no longer felt like a safe place. Her parents' arguments grew more frequent, her father's exhaustion heavier, her mother's patience thinner. Emily felt herself shrinking, fading into the background once more. One evening, overwhelmed and restless, she found herself walking past Mr. James's house. The porch swing still swayed gently, though the man himself looked older, frailer. His hands shook slightly as he worked, yet the same calm presence surrounded him. Without thinking, Emily climbed the porch steps and sat beside him. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. He simply placed a half-carved piece of wood in her hand and gestured for her to finish. And in that moment, it all came back. The lesson she had almost forgotten. The truth he had been teaching her all along. That sometimes strength isn't found in shouting louder or in demanding to be seen. Sometimes strength is found in patience, in steady hands, in showing up day after day, no matter how invisible you feel. Emily kept carving. Through high school, through the heartbreak of her parents' eventual divorce, through the long nights of studying when she thought she wasn't good enough, through the moments when loneliness threatened to break her, that little knife and block of wood became more than just a hobby. They became her anchor. Years later, Emily left town for college. She studied art, drawn to sculpture and design, but her real inspiration never came from classrooms or professors. It came from a quiet porch in a small town where an old man had once carved birds out of wood and taught her without ever speaking that life is shaped by patience, by presence, and by choosing to keep going even when the world doesn't notice. When she returned home years later, Mr. James's porch was empty. The house was quiet, the windows shuttered. She learned from a neighbor that he had passed away in his sleep, his hands finally still after years of silent teaching. Emily stood there for a long time, tears slipping down her cheeks. But in her hand, she still carried the little wooden bird he had given her all those years ago. And in her heart, she carried every lesson he had carved into her life. She didn't need him to speak. She didn't need him to explain. His silence had been enough. His presence had been enough. And now, it was her turn to carry that lesson forward. Today, Emily is no longer the invisible girl she once was. She became an art teacher, not the kind who fills the air with endless lectures, but the kind who sits quietly with her students, who lets them make mistakes, who shows them that the process is just as beautiful as the product. She teaches them that silence can be powerful, that patience can be strength, that sometimes the greatest lessons are the ones we cannot put into words. And maybe that is the point. Maybe life's most important lessons aren't spoken at all. Maybe they are shown, carved slowly into us by the people who come into our lives, not with noise, but with presence. So if you're listening to this, maybe you've been searching for answers. Maybe you've been waiting for someone to tell you exactly what to do. But perhaps, just perhaps, the answers you need aren't waiting in someone else's words. Perhaps they are already inside you, waiting to be carved out slowly, patiently, by the choices you make day after day. Remember this: silence is not weakness. Patience is not invisibility. And you, quiet, unseen, uncertain you, are capable of shaping something beautiful out of the rough, unpolished pieces of your life. Just as Emily learned from the teacher who taught without words, so can you. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones we never hear.